My name is Jordan Sowunmi. I am a DJ and one of the creators of Boozy Fade, which is a hip-hop party and also a series of online communities centered around film and television, hip-hop and R&B, fashion, video games, sports, books. We also have a podcast called Catch Up, which is about hip-hop, and we discuss it. I host stuff on TV, on video, host live events, I moderate panels. I was born in Canada, in Toronto. I think my parents moved to Canada instead of any other country for a similar reason that a lot of families immigrate to certain places in North America or in Europe, is that they had friends here that were from their homeland, their friends from Nigeria that were here. I think my dad moved here in the 70s for a bit, then he moved back to Nigeria, and then he met my mom there, and then they got married and eventually moved back here, but to Toronto in like 1985. When I think back to being a kid, I had grandiose visions of what I wanted to do. I didn't know how feasible they were. I remember that when I was like in high school, I watched a lot of TV and I read a lot, and I was really, for some reason, obsessed with shows like Entertainment Tonight. And I remember in high school being like, oh man, I would love to host a show like that one day. That would be so fun. I didn't really know how to go about doing something like that. And I went to university in Canada. I went to Western, which is in London, Ontario. And I remember it was like my first year was 2007. I think that was just around the time that like Wikipedia started becoming pretty big. And I remember spending a lot of time on Wikipedia in my first year, just like looking up people who had interesting careers, people who like were newscasters, people who were comedians, notable people in the business world, and kind of read their life story essentially. After doing this for a while, I started to notice that a lot of people that had jobs that I wanted kind of did a lot of the same things. As far as like being in university, they were like involved in campus radio, they wrote for the school paper, they were involved in events. And like seeing that, I kind of followed in those footsteps. I wasn't doing it with like the foresight of like, this is gonna lead to some amazing job. One day I was just like, oh, this seems like it'd be interesting, it'd be cool. It's available on campus for no more price than I've already paid, so I might as well just like look into it. Through doing those things, it kind of like set me on a path that led me to where I am today. I had to make adjustments based on what I took in school and like getting to the path that I'm on now. I did a general arts degree. I was a double major in English and political science, and those don't lead to any natural jobs. I was pretty well aware of that just from having spent all this time on Wikipedia and learning about just different people's career paths and seeing people with like similar degrees as mine having the kind of jobs that I thought were really interesting. I just tried as much as possible to learn as much as I could about the things that I was interested in. By the time I was done school, I mean, I'd been working for this event production company in London, and so I was running the social media and I was an editor of this blog. I like found all these writers to write for it. I was like really dead set on making sure that I had a job when I left school. I was like, I want to leave school and walk right into a job. And I realized that like the stuff that I was doing at school were like transferable skills that were becoming really marketable, like working in social media, just social media management in general. The most challenging thing that I face, that is something that I think has recurred in my life, is reconciling like my passions with what is like the kind of career that will bring me some stability. The first job that I got out of university, I worked there for 6 months, and I was also writing and doing stand-up comedy at the same time. And after that 6 months, I felt like I wasn't developing fast enough in writing or stand-up. I had this huge internal debate of like, should I leave the stability of this job to focus on this like kind of crazy creative thing that I'm really passionate about? And then I eventually just came to the conclusion that I was like, I can always get another job in marketing. I won't always have to be the ability to do stand-up or write. It was great. I got a lot of opportunities, got to be on TV a few times, but it was really hard to make that decision. I was like, okay, like I'm done with this freelance lifestyle, because half the job is doing the actual job, and then the other half is like being your own accountant and business manager and chasing people down to pay you. And after that, I was like, okay, I want some stability, and I went back and I got a job again. Had a job that took me to Amsterdam for a few years, and I was working in advertising. It was at an amazing company, like one of the best ad agencies in the world. At the same time, I was also working on like Boozy Fade, and which is like a passion project that was like really starting to blow up and like get a lot of attention. The window to make something bigger out of this is only going to be here for a short period of time. I mean, I decided to come back to Toronto and try to make it into a bigger thing. And I mean, I still feel very comfortable with that decision now, but I know there's probably a lot of people that were like, ooh, I don't know if I would leave a company like that to go and like pursue something like this. A bold decision that I'm the most proud of, I think it's probably two things. It's like, one, making the decision to move to Amsterdam in the first place was a pretty bold decision. At the time, I just like moved into like a big apartment with my girlfriend at the time in the West End of Toronto. And then this like crazy opportunity kind of comes up through LinkedIn. And at first I was kind of like, you know, I'll do the interviews, but I wouldn't take this job because like I'm not gonna move to Amsterdam, like that's ridiculous. Then I talked to my girlfriend about it and she was like, you know, it actually would be good for my career if we moved too. And I did a bunch of interviews and then they eventually offered me the job. And then another bold decision that I'm really proud of is the decision to move back. Living in Europe, it's like, it was fine. I mean, I didn't love it, I'll tell you that much. The job was great. I met a lot of amazing people, like lifelong friends. But I had this thing that was pulling me back home this whole time. You know, culturally, it wasn't really for me. Social, political issues in terms of race, stuff to do with like sexism. Living in Amsterdam, I felt like it was like being like 10 or 15 years behind. Honestly, like coming from a pretty progressive part of Toronto and progressive circle in Toronto, it was like suffocating being around people that you're like, I'm having a conversation that we were having like 15 years ago. For me, that was like enough for me to be a factor in my decision to move back here. So did I have pressure or support or both from my family and the decisions that I made career-wise? You know, it was really split. When I first started working, for instance, in journalism, and I wasn't making very much money, but I was working a lot. My mom was very supportive. My dad did not, basically. He was kind of like, you know, you went to university, like, get a real job. I felt a little bit of pressure from my dad on that front, at least at the beginning. But then at some point I also was like, you know, I got one life and it's mine. They want you to have those careers because they're stable. I know it comes from a good place. I was very much like, Dad, but you're like not living my life. You don't know what opportunities are or aren't available for me. Now it's like many years later, and I mean, I'm in a career that my dad would be proud of while still doing stuff on the like creative stuff on the side. It's like a completely different situation. Now I go see my mom and I can give her money, you know? And it's just like, it's just a nice feeling now to know that she supported me before and she like trusted that I knew what I was talking about and I did have a vision and this was gonna lead to something that was good for me. The story and like the vision of how we made Boozy Fade, this party and a series of online communities and like film events and a podcast, is that it all really happened very organically. It started way back when where James, like one of my best friends, came to me. He had DJed in the past. James presenting me with this idea kind of gave me the opportunity and he offered to teach me. Maybe a few months after that, we came up with this like idea to do a party that we were doing at like a small bar in the West End of Toronto called Red Light, called Boozy Fade. It pretty quickly started picking up steam. You know, it would fill up at like 10:30 and there would be a line outside until 1. I got in contact with this event booker at Parts and Labor, which is in the West End of Toronto. It's a much bigger space. It's maybe 4 times the size of Red Light. And it was like a huge hit. Throughout this process of like doing these monthly parties and building up this community of people, there was like a discussion, like a kind of conversation happening on our Facebook event walls that felt very unique to me and James. People were posting song links, they're posting GIFs, they're posting memes. You know, a big problem that we saw in like hip hop online discourse is that it's just like really negative. There's a lot of hating. There's a lot of attention giving to stuff that you don't like. And what we saw on our event wall is that it was not like that. It was people just talking about stuff they liked. An American journalist who was in the group wrote an article about us for UpRocks. And then, so we started getting all these international supporters. Throughout this, we kind of just listened to the community. You know, there was a time that we were talking about a lot of television shows, like in the main hip hop group. We were talking about like Atlanta and we were talking about Insecure. At some point, somebody was like, oh, what if you guys just created a place where we can talk about like film and television like on a more permanent basis? So we started a Boozy Fade Film Club. And at some point of that, like some people who worked at the TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, were in the group. And then they reached out to me to like introduce a film at TIFF. I met some of the higher ups at TIFF. That's how we started doing the film series at TIFF. And we've shown 6 or 7 films there. A lot of those nights have sold out. We have like the other groups that we have, which is like Boozy Fade Athletics Club, which is the sports one. Boozy Fade John Society, which is like the fashion group. The most recent thing that's I think getting a lot of attention for us is our podcast, which is called Catch Up. And it's just like a hip hop discussion podcast. We review albums, we talk about artists' career arcs, we talk about emerging trends. We have listeners like all over the world. We have listeners in 35 countries. Following our intuition, listening to the community, and reminding ourselves of like what are we providing people first, you know? What is the quote, "I didn't come this far to only come this far" mean to me? Just focusing on your goals, which is, I mean, it's a very generic thing, but it's like what are your ultimate goals? And I think that changes over time. Like my goals have changed so much over the course of my career. Like I can think of a time when I was doing stand-up comedy and that was my main focus for a few years. And then I also distinctly remember the day that I was like, that's no longer what I want to do. There's a feeling of like, oh, I don't know, are people gonna like not respect me anymore because I decided not, because I gave up, or because I like, you know, I pivoted to something else. You know, as long as you kind of keep that mindset of like, what do you value most in life in the short term and the long term? And what are the steps that are going to take for you to get there? That's the thing that quote brings to mind for me, is like, how do you keep that focus? My message to young people looking to create the future that they want is to focus on your passions. Don't think that you don't have the right to do a certain thing, no matter what field it is or what community it is, because it's like, you can learn the skills. There's YouTube. There are people that you can meet that have similar interests. Whatever it is that you're doing, you're probably gonna be bad at it at first, and probably for maybe a little while after that. And that's like a part of the process. And you won't get to being at the end point that you want if you don't have a start point. I'm Jordan Sowunmi, and I didn't come this far to only come this far.
Didn't come this far to only come this far.